Edward Harris had spent more than 30 years patrolling the Greenwoods. The forest wasn't just his workplace. It was his true address. He knew every bend of the river, every trail, every whisper of wind through the pines. His closest companion was Shadow, a 7-year-old black Labrador, steady and brave. Side by side, they walked the narrow trails, checked fragile ecosystems, and listened to what the wild had to say. On calm days, their patrols felt almost peaceful, but when the rains came, peace was shattered. For days, relentless storms battered the ridges, pounding like war drums on the earth. The easy river Edward knew turned violent and swollen, its brown water climbing higher, breaking trees, and dragging soil with it. Landslides scarred the hillsides. What had once been routine duty was now urgent, dangerous, and unpredictable. Edward drove his rattling pickup along the flooded road, Shadow alert in the backseat, eyes fixed on the raging river. Thunder rolled across the sky. The storm seemed alive. Then suddenly, Shadow barked a sharp, urgent bark that sliced through the roar of the storm. He lunged against the window, eyes locked on the riverbank. Edward squinted through sheets of rain. At first, he saw nothing but chaos. Then, his heart froze. In the torrent, a lion cub struggled to stay afloat, its tiny body swallowed by the current. The golden fur was plastered flat against its skin, its eyes wide with terror. It clawed desperately at the water, but every second dragged it closer to drowning. "Dear God," Edward whispered. Before he could move, Shadow leapt from the truck, a black streak against the storm. The dog plunged into the river mussels, taut head high against the current. Edward stumbled down the bank mud, sucking at his boots, shouting Shadow's name. The Labrador reached the cub, clamping his jaws gently on the scruff of its neck. The river spun them both like leaves in the wind. Edward ran the shoreline, desperate, helpless, as Shadow fought to angle back. Halfway across, the cub went limp. Edward's stomach dropped. Shadow tightened his grip, refusing to let go. Inch by inch, stroke by stroke, he battled the river until Edward could grab hold and drag them both onto the mud-slick bank. Shadow collapsed, gasping. The cub trembled faintly beside him, its breath's shallow life hanging by a thread. Edward bundled them both into the truck, heart pounding. At the wildlife clinic, vets rushed to work. They wiped mud from the cub's coat, pressed stethoscopes to its chest. Seconds stretched like hours. Then a paper-thin cry. The cub's eyes fluttered open. Relief broke across the room. Edward knelt beside Shadow, whispering into his damp fur, "You did it, boy. You gave him a miracle." The cub, later named Leo, was only 4 months old. Too young to fend for himself, too fragile to return immediately to the wild. The rescue center asked Edward to supervise his recovery in a semi-wild enclosure and to bring Shadow, whose presence calmed the frightened cub. At first, Leo kept to a corner of the pen, wary and silent. He had seen too much of fear, too close to death. Shadow lay nearby, not pressing, just breathing slow and steady. Days passed. One afternoon, Leo crept forward, sniffed Shadow's shoulder, and nudged his head against the black fur. It was the smallest of gestures, but it was enough. From then on, the two were inseparable. They tumbled in the dry grass, rolled over each other, and chased in circles until both collapsed, panting. At night, Edward found them curled together, a lion cub and a Labrador sharing warmth like brothers. Leo grew stronger. His coat regained its golden shine. His muscles filled out. His eyes sparked with energy. Other rangers came just to watch, shaking their heads at the sight. "Never seen anything like it," one muttered. "A lion and a lab like kin." Edward tended them both with equal care. To him, it was a gift from the forest itself. As months passed, Edward and Shadow helped Leo prepare for life beyond the fence. Edward hung lures from branches, hid food high and low, teaching him to stalk and pounce. At first, Leo missed his targets, clumsy and uncertain, but soon his movements sharpened. He leapt with precision, landed where he aimed. Shadow always watched from outside the fence tail, wagging, barking short cheers. Sometimes, they raced each other along the wire, one inside, one out. Anyone who saw it laughed through tears. It was play, but it was also practice for goodbye. Edward felt the weight of time pressing on him. The cub was becoming what he was born to be, a hunter of the wild. And yet, every evening Leo still pressed his head against Shadow's through the fence, as if to say thank you. 6 months later, release day arrived. Leo was now strong, his body sleek, his stride confident. A special transport truck was prepared to carry him to a reserve where he could live free. Edward brought Shadow to say goodbye. The Labrador pressed against the fence, licking Leo's face through the wire. Leo rubbed back, rumbling softly, a cub's farewell. Their sounds, half bark, half growl, were a language of brothers parting. Edward's throat ached. He hugged Shadow tightly. We gave him his chance, boy. The crate door swung open. Leo stepped inside with dignity, head high, though his eyes lingered on Shadow. Hours later at the grasslands, the gate opened wide. Leo leapt down, tasted freedom on the wind, and ran. His muscles rippled, his stride sure. At the crest of a hill, he turned once, staring back. Shadow barked clear and strong. Leo roared a cub's roar, carrying across the silence. Then he vanished into the wild. Edward placed a hand on Shadow's back. We gave him a miracle worth living. That night, back at the cabin, Edward sat before the fire, Shadow curled at his feet. The room was quiet, but his mind wasn't. Images of the storm, the rescue, the bond, the farewell, all played again. Sometimes Edward thought the forest gives gifts you cannot explain. A Labrador who risked his life for a cub, a lion who chose love before wildness, and an old ranger lucky enough to witness both. He leaned down, scratching Shadow behind the ears. You did good, partner. Shadow sighed deeply, eyes closing, finally at rest. And somewhere under the same sky, a young lion roamed free, carrying in his heart the memory of a black Labrador who had pulled him from the dark water, played with him like a brother, and taught him what it meant to survive. For Edward, that truth never faded. Courage and kindness can ripple across lives, across species, leaving behind miracles that last long after the storm. The story of Edward, Shadow, and the lion cub teaches us that courage and compassion often appear in the most unexpected forms. Shadow, a Labrador, did not hesitate to leap into a raging river, risking his own life to save another creature. His instinct reminds us that real bravery is not about power or control. It is about acting when others are in need, even when the cost is high. Edward, too, made a choice. He could have walked away, but instead, he opened his modest cabin, and his heart providing warmth and care, despite knowing it would stretch his own resources thin. Together, man and dog showed that kindness does not depend on abundance. It depends on willingness. Applied to our own lives, this lesson is clear. We may not all face storms or rivers, but we encounter people, friends, neighbors, even strangers who are drowning silently in their own struggles. Offering a helping hand, listening, or standing by them can be the difference between despair and hope. The bond between Shadow and the cub also shows that love and trust can cross boundaries of species, age, or background. In a world often divided, this reminds us that the greatest miracles happen when we choose compassion over indifference.